Hello. Mic test. Excuse me. Thank you. Good morning, guys. Thank you. Appreciate that. How are you guys doing? All right. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's Monday morning. Coming to San Francisco downtime and listening to the legacy systems is hopefully will be the fun. And it never happened that people talk about legacy systems first thing in the morning, but welcome. So as you can see, including myself and the honorable panelist, between four of us, I believe, sort of a pride moment because we represent almost close to 100 years of experience managing industrial control systems. And I'm going to ask a question a little bit later when the Q&A comes, what that means to you people. So let me introduce the panelist. Why don't you guys introduce yourself and maybe do a little icebreaker as to what have you been done in this particular industry?
So good morning. I am Mia Clift. I've been in IT and cybersecurity for 26 years now. Started in desktop support, worked my way through. My most recent position before my current one was working in the water and wastewater space. So that's where I kind of found my passion for OT and legacy systems and wanting to protect those even more than probably a lot of modern systems. So, and I guess my fun fact is that I'm really excited to see all the women in the audience today because I'm very passionate about women in cybersecurity. So thank you all for coming.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Harkins, Chief Security and Trust Officer with HiddenLayer, who won the RSA Sandbox Innovation Award last year. And I've been in the startup space for several years, but most of my life I spent at Intel Corporation, 24 years. And I was Chief Security and Privacy Officer for Intel, so spent a good deal of time dealing with manufacturing systems with my good friend Sachin there.
Hi, I'm Kristen Demoranville. I'm the CEO of Anson Sage and Anson OT. I'm also the host of Bytes and Bytes podcast. It's bytes like you bite something and then computer bytes, just to get that out of the way. I've been in cybersecurity and IT and OT for, 26 years, like you. My most notable is I worked in a bakery company for a long time. I managed their entire security team, as well as this little company called Sony, and I handled their factory security, as well as some of their awareness issues they were having. Now I run an organization that's focused on the food industry specifically, and all the things that go around that, so including water and agriculture. And that is also part of the legacy system structure, so I will be bringing that voice here for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Last but not least, my name is Sachin. As Malcolm mentioned, being into an ICS or OT industry where we never used to call an OT as an OT system. There was never a buzzword as an OT. We used to call system SCADA system. And I'll ask you a question, what the SCADA means. Please do not Google that word and the abbreviation. Most of my experience started with Malcolm as my mentor, almost about 25 years now in semiconductor industries, which is very cool space if you really wanted to be part of the OT or operational technology. And then briefly, I had a stint with automotive car industry. So that's really an understatement in terms of where the things are moving into the EV space. But thank you, as I mentioned, and the reason, one thing I like about these panelists, as you can see, if you look at the cybersecurity in general, there are always, diversity is always a concern, and we made sure that it's an inclusive space, specifically for the women, because to find people in cybersecurity in a woman, and on top of in OT is extremely hard. So please welcome Mia and Christine, and Malcolm and Sachin. And I'll start off with a couple of questions to each panelist. Maybe Mia, you might want to start, and maybe I'll give it to Malcolm and Christine. So can you tell me in your career, like when do you realize the importance of legacy systems? That was pretty critical.
So I think the first time I saw a legacy system was working in a tugboat company, actually. And you would think tugboats really don't need technology, but they actually do. I mean, they use them to determine where the tugs are at any given time. They have computers on board. They have all these systems, but they were using really legacy systems like Lotus Notes and other things like that. So having to keep those systems up to date, and then also making sure that the guys aren't messing them up or destroying them was probably the first time that I really noticed that we had to do extra protections around them. And then, of course, as I grew into other spaces, my dad was an electrical engineer, so I knew about PLCs and SCADA systems, but didn't really know where the ecosystem sat until I was doing some government contracting, and then realized that some of the systems that we were looking at and auditing from a cybersecurity perspective were as old as I was. And I was like, oh, how are we going to protect those in the future? And and then when I got in the water space, realized you can't do everything that you would expect to do in a normal network to protect those systems. So how do we do that successfully?
Thank you, Mia. Malcolm, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, for me, it was an interesting journey. As a young finance person at Intel, cost is king, and having bought compute equipment for Intel's factories, once you build a few billion-dollar factory, you don't want to spend more money, you just want to crank out output. And so as a finance person, I was against upgrades because it cost money and it hit product margin. Years later, after 9/11 and Code Red and NIMDA in late 2001, I'm running security in the IT side, and I'm like, what the hell are these old dated systems that you can't patch? There's still DOS in the factories and all this stuff. And so it was a completely different paradigm to think about it, because on the cost side of it, you wanted to keep them running as long as possible without any changes to improve margin. On the security side, it was like, oh, good God, what did I do on the finance side that actually made the security problem worse? So I've seen both sides of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Cost versus finance, it's always very difficult. How about you, Christine?
So I think for me, it's when I realized that the technology that we work with inside of the food industry, this is when I was back at the bakery company, could potentially kill us. And I know that's really extreme, not just because you slipped and fell on a wet floor, but just because the food could be interacted with, tampered with, affected. It's a food safety issue at that point. I think also too, throwing it back to younger days, my dad was a fireman. In fact, I come from a long line of firemen, including fire trucks being built in my family's name. And I think that knowing that the equipment that they work with was trying to save lives, but also could affect lives. Like if you used a defibrillator the wrong way, you could hurt somebody, right? So I think that kind of always was stuck in my head. So as I moved through these organizations, I realized that, oh, hey, if this machine fails, it could knock somebody into a vat, it could knock somebody into an oven. If you're looking at an electronics factory, you get electrocuted, very easily. All these things, I started to realize that we needed to put better controls around them because we need to keep people safe. Employees needed to stay safe to keep production running, which is ultimately what we all care about. But also, too, I like good, clean, safe food. I'm sure everybody agrees in this room. Mm-hmm. So that's when I realized, yikes.
Awesome. I think what I can tell you, that was first lesson back in the days when you come from an IT or cybersecurity and moving into the OT space, you must understand the physical systems. Because if you do not understand the electrical, mechanical, chemical, gas, even though that might not be part of your curriculum in IT, but it matters. And why it matters? Because somebody is doing a risk assessment in IT versus doing in OT. Life safety matters, and we are talking about human life. Thank you, Christine. So maybe the second question. So what are the most misconceptions of the legacy systems that exist in a cybersecurity?
I would say that a lot of people don't understand them, so they discount them, or they ignore them, or they just don't know they're there, or it's legacy knowledge as well. I want to make that clear too, because it's not just the systems, it's the knowledge of the people. Those people that have been there 40, 50 years, who know that if you hit it with a wrench sideways to the left and then kick it, it still works. That's the kind of knowledge that also needs to be protected. And I think if that knowledge isn't protected alongside of the systems, you're going to have real big issues when those employees leave or they get replaced by IoT or something like that. So that it doesn't matter because I don't know what it is kind of a really scary mentality inside of these environments. Or if you put up some type of asset management tool, all of a sudden it's throwing all these errors that this is a risk, that is a risk, and then you just want to remove it instead of actually looking at it, having conversation with the people that manage your OT. Or if you don't have a team that manages OT, you start to talk to the people around it, the engineers, the people that built that area. Yeah, that always scared me, is people just like, oh, what is that? I don't care what that is. And it's the most critical thing of your whole facility.
How about you, Malcolm?
Yeah, I think there's two misperceptions in this space. One is from sometimes other IT management, factory management, that because the systems are on-prem and behind some type of network segmentation, they're protected. The other misperception is frankly from the security side, where we go and say you have to upgrade the systems in order to protect them, which also isn't true. And so you have to navigate both sides of that, because some cases a legacy system that can't be updated can be highly protected and highly effective at what it's doing without having to spend more money. But you have to really navigate both sides of that in order to dial in the cost and the protection at the right level.
You want to add?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I'll add to that is also the perception of it's fine, that's not a risk, is very pervasive. You know, OT's been around for a really long time, and everybody just expected it to work and expected it to do everything that it was going to do without it being on the internet, and you didn't have to think about any of the risks that we're facing today. But we're now seeing that these risks are being actualized. They're finding ways to compromise the PLCs. They're finding ways to compromise these systems. And it's not just a matter of like data loss, like we see in normal cybersecurity incidents or privacy protections. It's actual physical harm that could be done through these compromises. And so having to change the mentality of that won't happen here is really going to be imperative to improving and getting buy-in to take care of these systems, because you can't just update a PLC really easily. I mean, how many of you in this room work in OT? Raise your hands. Okay, so you all know what I'm talking about. It's expensive to replace a system. To that end too, some of these systems have been around for so long, they're so ingrained, and I'm not just talking OT. I mean, I know that there are government systems that are probably as young as Malcolm. So, but you know, older than me.
Yes, I am older than you.
Extra burn.
Okay.
We're friends, but seriously, some of them are so old that you don't have the programmers in place anymore. You don't have the knowledge or the documentation in place, but they're so integral to operations that you have to keep them running. So for example, I mean, the biggest example that we all know about right now is Voyager, and how it took them 6 months to get that back online, and they had to do some really creative things to make that legacy system continue working way out in space.
No, thank you, guys. I think probably part of the misconceptions of the legacy system, most of you guys probably when say you are in OT or in IT, one thing I can tell you what I learned over the years is OT was well before here, before even a computer were invented. So if you go back to the 200 years of history, from moving on from a kerosene to the, Thomas Edison invented the light, that is a mechanical device. That is an OT device, and hence we have now lights and microphones, and then the cybersecurity came along. But thank you, guys. So maybe question, how has the importance of the legacy system security evolved over the career? And we are not talking about the age.
Yeah, well, I think it's evolved a ton. Go back a couple decades ago, most folks in the factories, they had a flat network, and those things were connected to a regular network. And after things like Code Red, Nimbra, SQL Slammer, all of a sudden you started getting, network segmentation and other things there. But again, sometimes you can't patch those systems. You can't run a scan against them. There's so many intricacies to what you can and can't do. And then these days, and you look at what's happened just the past couple of years, you've got AI, that's outside the factory, but used for factory optimization. Heck, back at Intel, there's white papers on this, 15, 16 years ago, Intel's data science team reported to me. We were using early machine learning to optimize factory output. You've got, companies like Freeport-McMoRan and the mining company. It's a study done last year on McKinsey. They've gotten $350 to $500 million of EBITDA benefit. EBITDA, for those that are not finance folks, is earnings before income and interest and taxes. $2 billion worth of cost avoidance for mining copper because of using AI from the data from the factory. So you have this really interesting mix of new technologies that are helping optimize even old OT systems in different environments.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what's changed is that move to cloud computing, to be able to have a remote workforce. We saw it during the pandemic that these systems that were never intended to be online, you can now have a need to VPN into because you didn't want your people on site as much as we'd had them. And so that opened up firewalls, that opened up remote access, and of course we ended up with incidents that occurred from that. But also then you start seeing these cloud providers that are doing this optimization that say, hey, we can optimize your water system, or we can optimize your electrical plant. We just need you to open these 40 ports. And it's like, wait a second. I wouldn't allow you to do that in modern security. Why am I going to let you do that in OT? And again, it's like, why is this a big deal? It's just OT. It's fine. It's not a threat. And we're like, no, I assure you it is. So getting that understanding in the space is really imperative.
I think, again, swinging it back to food and ag, you look at it from this perspective. That's how I always describe OT. We originally started plowing our own fields with plow, and we did it as humans. And then we added cattle and then horses or whatever. And now we have autonomous tractors that can be hacked. It's crazy to think about the innovation that's run there so fast that we haven't had time to catch up with security. Let alone anybody who is really there to do it. Most people just buy it because it's they need to get something done quickly and efficiently, but they don't think about the damage with any type of data. If anybody got a hold of one of those tractors, it could take an entire field out, which would ruin the crop, which would really screw over the farmer. In terms of factories, same thing. AI learning is huge inside of the food industry now because it's helping them be more efficient and produce faster. How are we supposed to keep up with that as professionals in security and OT? It's very difficult because we're not brought to the table early. So I think that part of this process of this growing up thing is going to have to be more communication, figuring out how we can work together, how we can meet the same demands together as we consistently evolve. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night, truthfully.
Well, and I think I'll add to that too. The internet is only 40 years old. So everything that we're doing is still new, and legacy is happening way faster. I mean, something that's 4 years old, even 3 years old, could be legacy in your environment just because the upgrade cycle is happening so rapidly. And other systems can't keep up with that. So there's that additional benefit or additional difficulty of having to keep up with the cycle of modernity while meeting the needs of everything that's already extant.
Yeah, no wonder if you run a showdown and see how many OT systems are on internet. Please don't do that.
Yeah, please don't.
All right, so next question. So what are the biggest security challenges within your legacy systems today?
To be honest, I think for most organizations, I'll go back to the cost side of it. When you touch them, when you upgrade them, when you make changes to them in some way, shape, or form, you're either affecting output and yield, which affects revenue and margins, or you're spending money on a factory, which again directly hits product cost. And the P&L mechanics of what you're trying to do in terms of hitting certain margins goes against the grain to spend money to protect them. And so to me, the biggest challenge is getting over that economic hurdle and figuring out a way to amortize, in essence, the cybersecurity investment over the life of the factory versus looking at them as in-period charges, again, finance person, that directly hits margin at that time. That's an accounting issue, but I think that's at the crux of why we have so many challenges in investing in cybersecurity in the OT environment.
I think to that end too, in the public space, we have a challenge where you have to make a determination on where that money's going to go. In the water space specifically, is it going to go to a new water main because that water main broke last week and people are boiling water? Or is it going to go to that new OT system or some kind of security implementation for that OT system? And until there's a risk-benefit analysis done and more investment in that space via either government or municipality or even taxes, I hate to say that word, but if there's some kind of investment in prioritizing that, that's what's going to happen. I think also from a technology standpoint, we all like playing with the new shinies. I mean, I have a new watch, I have a new iPad, it's all the new latest and greatest, but we have to take it into account that legacy systems exist, and we either have to make time to build new systems and innovation for those spaces, and plan for end of life, or we need to allocate resources to keeping those systems going. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of organizations too, because it's just that runs, it's fine, it's in the background. We're just going to keep letting it run and pretend that everything's peachy when it's really not.
You guys did great. I'm going to add one more thing. Labor force. We don't
Thank you.
have enough people doing the work. We have a lot of people that are doing the work and they're stretched thin. I think most OT people would agree that you're very much booked and busy, and you will always be booked and busy because there's never not enough time to do everything you need to do. However, I think that part of the problem we have is that everybody's talking about, cybersecurity, which is great. We want you to come in and work with us. It's great. But we're not getting people excited about working in OT security. We actually have a ton of fun over here. We're saving lives. What are you doing? Saving data? That's cool too, but like we're saving lives. So I always try to like, come over here, we've got better cookies. But we really need to have this better education. But the problem becomes is you have to be more hybrid and you have to be agile. And you have to be able to move through different situations a little bit differently. Obviously in the food industry, I had to know more about food safety than I probably ever wanted to. And we talk about with water, I have a degree in environmental management. So with water, it helps me understand that better because I've been to a wastewater treatment facility, those kind of things, and I've worked with those people. So having those type of hybrid skills is going to be super important inside of OT because you have to be able to flux between the old to the new and then anticipate the new.
And so when I started at my last gig and I was talking to the OT folks and I was just like, well, why can't we just do this big security thing? Why can't we implement multi-factor authentication? Why can't we just put it in a terminal server and have you remote in with tunnels? Why can't we do these things? And I was thinking with the security mindset of a modern IT construct. I wasn't thinking in the mind of the Purdue model. I wasn't thinking about how OT systems work or work differently. And so it took a little bit of changing my own mindset to identify that maybe this doesn't work the same way, and maybe I have to be a bit more innovative and flexible. And yes, I do have to separate those networks because if I don't, I'm going to put that at a greater risk because of the ransomware and all the other attacks that can happen to more modern systems. So it's definitely a different way of thinking, and we have to really kind of expand our own minds from this is the way of cybersecurity to this is the way of cybersecurity in OT.
Yeah, well, to add into OT in a medical environment, right? And to your point, back a few years ago, there was a study released, Graduate School of Management at Vanderbilt University, some medical associations, and the headline read, cybersecurity events impact patient care. And so one would think it was the ransomware events that were affecting hospitals that affected patient care. The reality was, they studied thousands of incidents that had affected hospitals. There was for every 1,000 patients that were treated for critical heart conditions in emergency rooms, there was 10 patients who died post an event because of the cybersecurity controls put in place in a hospital that slowed down patient care. Again, same thing in a factory environment. You would think MFA makes sense. To some extent, it does for some systems. In the subfloor, when people are going around doing stuff, they don't have the time to go do username and password. They don't have the time to do MFA, right? Because of the operating environment, just like in an operating room, an emergency room. So we also have to take the concept of what they're doing to what Mia said and say, how do we keep them efficient in their job and not have the security controls impede their ability to execute the role? Because in doing that, again, it affects factory output, it affects patient care, again, but it's understanding that context that's different than if I'm just in a office environment and if I'm slowed down by 20 seconds doing MFA, okay, who cares?
No, thank you. I think the biggest secret challenge, the question was in the legacy systems today. I think the way I put it, probably it goes what Christine and Malcolm were saying. It's about the people, understanding of an OT environment, whether you're from an IT and OT and talking the same language, coming to appropriate discussions. But no, thank you. So maybe a next question. So what are the successful integration of a modern security into the OT environment or legacy environment that you guys have seen?
I think it comes down to just what Malcolm said, people process. You have to find a way to work with the people and the process, because if it impacts production, uptime, and employee safety, they'll circumvent your security controls without even thinking about it. And you won't know right away probably. And then if you do find out, you'll scold them and they'll say back, well, you're messing up my job. And then there's this tension that builds and it's really difficult. The password thing. So I was in a media factory a few years back. That, for those who don't know what a media factory is, CDs, DVDs, that kind of thing, Blu-ray. And obviously cell phones are not allowed in there, and you can't have like little devices because somebody could steal a movie and then release it early and all these things. So what they were having trouble with is they couldn't figure out how to do passwords because they're wearing gloves. It's actually a really chemical-based process. So they couldn't enter passwords in quickly. So we decided that the best way to handle it was to create a barcode and use a dummy scanner to scan them in when they were on the floor. And I know everybody kind of went, what? But no, it's actually really easy because nobody can take a picture of that anyways, because it doesn't face the side where the red carpet tour goes through. Nobody would be able to take a photo. Nobody's photographing anything in there anyways because it would get them fired, and it's illegal and due to copyright laws. But the dummy scanners worked great because they could quickly pick up the dummy scanner, log in, and do their job, and it didn't impede. It was like a 1-second thing. But it took like an act of God to get that whole situation going through, because you had to get like the blessing from all of the security teams to say that it was okay, and then you had to show them that it was okay. And there was no incident that's been recorded in any of those factories since then because of that particular thing they've been doing with the dummy scanners. It was brilliant. So it's like the simplest, almost silliest little things that actually make the difference in these environments.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And Sachin, you may remember back at Intel, we had created scanning capabilities so that, again, you've got people in and out of factories with devices, even vendors coming in to do things. And you don't want an unknown device in the factory. So how do you do it? Well, we'd put these scanning stations in front of the factories. And it's like there's a physical control. We can slow them down for 2 minutes to run a scan and say that device doesn't have anything on it that appears to present a risk, let it go through. But if it got flagged, they couldn't bring it in or it had to be remediated. And sometimes, and even there, because it was outside the factory, it didn't hit product cost because we were able to manage it so that it wasn't on the factory floor and wasn't impacting margin. So again, sometimes it's just where you place the control allows for the efficiency and the effectiveness of what you're trying to do.
I think also just any little step is a step in the right direction. I think we all get stuck by analysis paralysis a lot and being like, oh, well, we have to do everything right now to protect all the things. And I think that's based off of like audits and findings and getting everything done and trying to fix everything today. We don't have to do that. We can make small interminable changes that will allow the progress to happen, and that allows buy-in to happen at that slow rate. So even if it's just adding that scanner in or giving somebody a token instead of having them put in a password, just to speed up the process, make it easier on them, but keep it extra secure. Putting in a VLAN, it's not the best solution for separating networks all the time, but it is a solution. Even virtualizing a server that's Windows 95, which I've seen, because it keeps it online and it keeps it in a space that you can control and isolate the network and put in access control lists a lot easier. So sometimes it's just something very simple that makes a big impact that can get that buy-in to continue making more improvements as modernization comes forward.
It was my favorite saying I just heard recently. You just made me think of it. Stop trying to boil the ocean, just make a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is.
Well, the other thing to recognize in some cases as well, particularly if the life safety systems are taken care of, the environmental impacts are taken care of, the remaining risk is really that of output, in which case you can make that business decision all day long. I'm fine with losing $10 million an hour of factory output if I get ransomed. Okay, great. Do we have a recovery plan? Yes or no? If the other things are taken care of and it's really just about lost revenue, that's a business decision. And it's okay to have a factory be offline if the company's aware of it. And if you're a public company, it's going to be material. And you've put it in your 10K financial filings that you might suffer downtime in your factory and you don't have mitigation. Everybody's aware, no problem.
No, thank you. I think following to those questions, I'm going to skip some of the questions due to the time limit, but I think this is a twofold questions so that we can answer in one. Okay, what are some of the risks associated with the increased visibility of an OT systems with the new slew of cybersecurity controls? And now the second follow-on question is that also, can you discuss the scenario where improved OT visibility helped thwart the potential security breaches?
Well, I mean, the reality is we need visibility in order to manage the factories. The problem is the systems management tools that we put in place to do that actually creates the vulnerability for those things to be taken over and manipulated. So you're stuck with I need it to manage it, but in doing so, I've made myself more vulnerable. In which case, you really, really need to look at those visibility tools, really do your third-party risk analysis, and make sure that the administrative controls on those is probably more protected than the general end-user controls to logging into a system. Because you have to manage the vulnerability you just put in place by creating systems management capabilities that give you that visibility.
And you need to make sure you have people that understand what those devices are that are looking at the monitoring tool. If you don't, then it's going to be mismanaged. It will be blocked. It will be somehow hindered. It could be viewed as a risk in the wrong way, because not everything that's a risk inside of an OT environment is a risk in the regular world, and vice versa. Like I said, the password thing, as an example, is not a risk in an OT world as it would be in an everyday modern security, which I like. I'm going to steal that world. But yeah, it definitely.
Well, and to add on to what you just said, recognize that your typical security policies don't necessarily apply the same way in an OT environment. You need to really look at the context of it and have a separate set of policies. Otherwise, your auditors are going to pull your typical IT security policies, and they're going to flag all this stuff in a factory environment that does not apply, having seen that too many times.
Yeah,
Written
I've
those
seen that just
policies.
recently. Yeah. Understanding again that, OT security and IT security are very different environments, and you have to find ways to meld them is really important. I think the visibility thing is really great too, but also, understanding too that even with vulnerabilities, you have to weigh the risk and the benefit of patching it. How many times have we seen a patch come out that ends up breaking something else? I mean, we've seen it so many times, and sometimes it can be really expensive. I know a company that patched a PLC controller right after they had bought brand new monitors, and the monitors were by the same company, but for some reason, patching that PLC made those monitors unusable, so they were out like $120,000. That's crazy. So you have to really make sure that you're building in cycles to test these things effectively, to make sure that they're going to work, that they aren't going to open up greater vulnerabilities or greater expense to the business, and then work together with the teams to make a viable conclusion and a viable safe movement.
So basically what they're saying is every OT cybersecurity personnel need a get out of free jail card if you really want to do those activity. And believe me, that word is really useful to the management because I have used it many times. Every time we enable those asset visibility and the risk and vulnerability, one side of the IT is always, oh, you use Windows NT, Windows XP, but they forget to see what it runs in the back end, in the downstream infrastructure, the PLCs and the core infrastructure of the companies where the bread and butter of the employees is coming from. Thank you, guys. What are some of the effective strategies for integrating modern security measures into the legacy environment?
Talk to the people, learn their process, design your controls around it. I know that's really sounds simple. It's definitely a boil the ocean kind of vibe, and then you have to find out what is the most critical. What's the most critical to the environment you're in? Like, aka, what's going to burn the building down or kill everybody in it? And then start from there, and then move down. What is your least critical? Don't worry about that right now. Get through what you need to get through that's critical, and then you'll be able to move through. You also need to get the buy-in of wherever you're working. If you do not get the buy-in of a factory or any of these industrial environments, they will just completely run you over. They will not do anything. They'll circumvent your tools. They'll circumvent everything. I've seen so many times been in data centers, and I'm sure my colleagues would say the same, that they've had security tools are unplugged because it was throttling and it was affecting our production, so we unplugged it. And I can't really blame them. If it was affecting my job too, I would have done the same. I mean, how many times have we done that in our lives? But those kind of things, you have to work with the people and process to be effective with that. And if you don't, it's going to be really difficult. It'd be really like pushing a boulder up a hill.
To be honest, what I would tell you is to go hire from your factory. Go get people that are factory technicians, train them on security. One of the best things I ever did 20 plus years ago at Intel, when we were building out and scaling our security operations center, we moved it out of California and we built it in Penang, Malaysia, and San Jose, Costa Rica, where we had assembly test, and we went and hired factory technicians to run the SOC, which gave me context understanding of the factories, gave me credibility with the factories, and then we no longer had this "you guys don't understand" back and forth. And you've got smart technologists in the factories. You can go hire them, train them, and get the expertise that way.
I would add to that your emergency response plans and your incident response plans are imperative. We know things are going to happen. It's an inevitability. But knowing how to run your systems in manual, knowing how to adapt and overcome during those incidents, and how to adapt those legacy systems and keep them running. Again, in the case of having an XP system, if you have a hard XP system but you need that to keep running, can you put it in virtual to run it virtually in an incident, or keep it isolated as much as possible? I think we miss that so much in so many worlds because we have that mentality that it's not going to happen here. But that's going to be the worst day of any of our lives when it actually does happen. So let's practice it as much as possible in advance to make sure that we have the failovers. And that also helps us gain that understanding of what's going on in those networks to say, okay, what can we fix? What can we help? Because during that incident, you learn so much about what's going on in the environment. Who's the person who knows all the things? So you can go and have that conversation with that person and say, okay, we want to do some improvements here. How can we do it without messing up your workflow, without messing up the system, or without taking something offline that's going to be really disastrous? So it has a lot of benefits when you think about it from that perspective too.
Thank you. This is why these systems are called cyber physical system. Physical is a key component. These systems are not running on the cloud. Hence the defense in-depth strategy, protecting your factories, your crown jewels starts with the physical security, batch systems, camera systems, moving on into your critical systems. Who has access to your factory floors? Doesn't necessarily all the employees needs an access just because they work for a company. They have no means and understanding of a PLC. But thank you. Network segmentations. This is a very interesting question, and I absolutely have my way of saying it, but I'm going to ask the panelists. How can an organization leverage AI and machine learnings to enhance security of the legacy systems?
Malcolm.
I really want to understand.
I can go first. Scenarios. You can start working with AI to have scenario discussions and exercises. So you could type in, Godzilla might attack my factory, what do I need to know? Mm-hmm. And AI should be able to give you some type of an understanding based on historical information, what you probably will be looking at. Understand that it's AI, so you kind of have to take it for what it is and your prompt engineering skills. However, I think that is where we're going to see AI integrate a little bit more into OT, is kind of this resource planning, process planning, futuristic mindset of how are we going to deal with these things and what do we need to deal with. Also, too, compliance is going to keep running into us a lot more often. That will also help with that type of planning as well.
Well, I think in some cases it already is helping protect factories. I mean, I was at Silence for a number of years, right? One of the first cybersecurity companies used artificial intelligence to mitigate malicious code execution. A lot of vendors that we're using that are on the ingress and egress of the factories have already embedded some type of AI capability in those controls in order to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of them. So then the question just becomes, how does that apply further? How do you use things like generative AI? How do you improve things in your SOC? And do threat intelligence and some other data mining capabilities to identify attacks or speed up your context understanding so that you can make better decisions. You know, so for me, I think you can start doing all those things, but then you also have to recognize, are those AI systems properly protected? And I can tell you, most cases, the answer is no, because the technologies that are all on the floor around here that we use for our enterprise don't work to protect AI, just like they generally don't work to protect an OT environment because they weren't purpose-built for that.
I think
But-
also, just to add one more quick thing, the asset visibility. You know, for the longest time, you had to do manual asset inventories for OT systems and for legacy systems. Now we have AI capabilities to do the scans and then be like, well, why is this camera on the OT network? It should be on the camera network, and leaving you vulnerable. You know, why is this Windows box over here? How does this communicate here? So having the avenues to really have greater visibility is going to be a great advantage in the future too.
Thank you, and this is why I always love to change this question. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a very interesting topic and discussion on this. Not that we're going to answer, but the reason why I'm going to ask this question so that you guys understand why it is critical for an audience. So how can an organization leverage AI, actual intelligence for machines to enhance security of their legacy systems? No, that was a difference. Actual intelligence versus artificial intelligence. Thank you. Anyway,
Tricking us.
I think we have 9 more minutes left, and I appreciate this time for a Q&A. So if any audience who wants to come up front to the microphone and ask panelists questions, I would appreciate.
There's a microphone, D.
In the back.
Hello, I'm John Olivares, and this question is going to be directed to you, Mr. Malcolm. You mentioned earlier, well, the challenge is always OT, obviously. I work for a beer manufacturing company in Mexico.
Hooray, beer!
So anytime you drink a Corona Modelo Pacifico, that's me.
Excellent. Thank you.
We import into the U.S. Hope you enjoy it. But we also have wine and spirits. I'm Constellation brand, so if you like tequila, mezcal, all that good stuff, yeah.
We'll see you
Well, I already
outside.
Yeah, we'll have a conversation.
So right now we're working towards the struggle that I believe Ms. Christine talked about, getting the buy-in. But Mr. Malcolm, you made a comment earlier, which I'm trying to find a way. By the way, I'm the lead for our Enterprise Threat and Vulnerability Management Program. We're talking policy, we're talking standards, we're talking SLAs, we're talking pulling hair out every day of the week on how to resolve this. But on the OT side, it appears, and by the way, I've only been in this for a year and a month, just to let you know that.
Well, welcome.
I've learned a lot.
Yep.
A lot. The only thing is the challenge is obviously the buy-in. And Mr. Malcolm, obviously we have old-fashioned engineer guys running the show. And it's like you're not touching my environment, right?
Yeah, well, and you know, factory managers understand risk. They understand the life safety, usually. Sometimes they'll cut corners on that too. But they understand output, right? And so they're taking risks daily on lost production. And so the cyber aspect of it, they might just go, that's another potential risk that could lose output. And for me, I go, as long as they're aware of it, and and you can demonstrate how exploitable the factory is. So again, go back 20 plus years ago when I tripped my way into security. Factory managers knew that if there was an earthquake in Oregon that affected this one factory, it would have the biggest effect on Intel's profit and loss because it was the highest margin product. It was a sole source silicon factory. Okay, great. Do you understand that the probability of an earthquake is lower than the probability of a cyber event that would do the same damn thing? As soon as we had that dialogue, they were like, oh, didn't realize that. Okay, well, great. Now that you do we want to spend the money, and if so, how? To protect the output. pure business decision. If it's a life safety issue or something like that, different context. But if it's purely output and the right people understand the risk and they don't care, I'd say move on.
And you mentioned also, I'm an engineer by heart, electrical. So I'm out there in the OT environment. So they did bring me into this position saying, since you know the environment, we need your help. But it's driving me crazy because of understanding the cybersecurity side. But you mentioned something earlier, maybe I misunderstood what you meant, but because we have our outages, we have our maintenance windows, they're like 48 hours such, where we have lines that are down, maybe a filler's getting cleaned, so on and so forth. But you say giving them an awareness, and maybe I misunderstood, but within the budgeting plan or such, because we have outages where we do lose production and we have a loss of money. But if we're able to kind of give them a look at, like you're saying.
We would stage patches and wait till the maintenance window, right? But again, to Mia's point, you've got to really understand, will that patch actually, have you done the QA to make sure that patch will not, frankly, screw up the factory?
So you're talking about maybe non-prod as
like testing it.
So
which we
maybe-
don't have that environment. That's the challenge. that
Maybe
we
I'll
don't have
interject.
someplace.
Is it possible? I know we have few more
and I'm
participants
sorry.
wanted to
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
you,
sorry
and
about
we would
that.
happy
We
to
can
take
chat
your
We can
follow-on
chat
questions
offline.
right outside.
Yeah.
I'm
I-
sorry,
I
I don't
will.
want to cut you off,
No,
but
no worries.
to the
I can
lady.
stay here forever.
Question, please.
Thank you. I'm Didi Budiharto. I've been CISO for multiple oil and gas companies. My question is, in the oil and gas companies, we've been trying to converge OT and IT. By converging, I mean you have centralized controls and visibility and monitoring everything. Can you guys share some success story whether or not it has happened in other industries outside oil and gas? Thank you.
I think I've seen a fair amount of that integration beginning to happen. It's really, it has to be a joint effort. You have to be able to give and take on both sides. And the IT people have their priorities, the OT people have their priorities. It's almost like security has to be the mediator and say, we both have benefit here. Let's work together. I know it's not what you expect. I know it's not what I expect, but also we have to be kind of congruous to be successful. So I've seen it a lot more in energy. Energy's doing a lot of really good collaboration and moving forward and building those inroads. And I think everybody else will kind of follow because energy's kind of setting the standard. Again, looking at like SBOMs and things too, that's a great example of how technology and OT and all of these systems are going to come together to be successful.
Well, I think the other thing is you need to think about where you need visibility and how often, right? If I have an offshore oil rig, I might only need the visibility on the rig and then pump that data on a daily basis up to a central spot versus give the central team direct visibility and direct access. So you have to think about the architecture of how you do it, because that may be the right answer of managed visibility, but you keep the visibility local and then you share certain things up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mick Braun, Southern Company. This is to Malcolm, since you brought up the A word, accounting. We're capital rich, O&M poor. And the challenge often is that the work that's needed to make something more secure that's legacy is not a new shiny, it's labor and time. And when I go to do that with capital dollars, the question is always, okay, what's the asset you're going to put in service and depreciate over X years? What jujitsu have you used to overcome?
Oh, I've done a ton. There are ways you can actually capitalize the labor. You have to think about, though, and work with the financial accounting team. And again, I wrote Intel's software capitalization rules 30 years ago. So there's ways in which, even if you're doing scripts and other things like that are labor intensive and some other work, that you can bundle it, capitalize it, and then amortize it over the time period. But you've got to go work with the accounting teams and get to the right GAAP rules and somebody who understands how to do that.
Yeah, have you used the kind of the life of, say it's a plant, have you used the life of the plant, or have you used...
Yeah, exactly, or you could, sometimes it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but you've got to take those in-period expenses and figure out how to bundle them so they can be capitalized and then amortized over whatever the accounting team feels is appropriate. And obviously the factory manager wants it longer, some people want it shorter, but there's ways in which you can do that, but you have to get to the right accounting person to figure out those accounting rules.
Great,
Thank you, Malcolm. How about you, sir?
Hi, my name is Sitaram. I come from semiconductor industry as well as Sachin does. So my question is more on the third-party risk and GRC. That's the function I manage, one of the functions, right? So I haven't heard a whole lot about that. In a world where everybody is becoming smarter to blame the risk and push it to other side, right? We can do that very comfortably in the IT, cloud, you can share responsibilities, things like that. We have a very small footprint in the company for OT, lab spaces where the legacy systems are. What trends are you seeing when it comes to risk sharing with the vendors and also cyber insurance?
So I will absolutely take that up.
It's all you.
So I actually work in insurance now. I'm helping to make risk decisions and build out our cyber profile at Liberty. So one of the things that we're looking at is we're taking a deeper look at OT and looking at where the responsibility lies in those situations and where the overlap of different policies takes place. And that's something that we're working on, and we'll probably be putting out more information on that in the future from our leadership and teams. But from the third party side, it is difficult to understand where your responsibility ends and the vendor exists. I mean, I actually heard a vendor here on the floor last year tell me that testing the patch to make sure it's compatible with other pieces of their same technology was on my business, not on them. So I think that's going to be a learning curve for the technology companies that are providing the OT tech, is understanding that they have a shared responsibility just as much. And then that kind of goes into like the warranty service and tech E&O. And if they don't have that in the insurance side, then they're going to be liable for these things. That I think is something that they're learning now, because there's that more shared responsibility, because these vulnerabilities do have an effect from a risk perspective and from a cybersecurity perspective. So watch this space, it's coming, I promise.
Thank you.
I think SEMI E187 and SEMI E188, if you look into it, you'll probably get more detailed understanding of the semiconductor cybersecurity posture. Yes, sir, last question.
Hey, I'm Jack Morgan. I work for basically third-party risk with Aravo, and you're talking about OT risk versus IT risk.
Yeah.
Is there value in doing the OT risk assessment for a third party separate from the IT risk?
Yes.
Yes, 100%.
You should.
Yeah, they should be absolutely separate, because the risks of OT are going to be different than the risk of IT, and you can't use the same questionnaire. CISA has actually come to that realization by doing some of the assessments in the water space, and they're literally like, we can't answer that because we don't do, we don't set up an AD environment for our OT because it's too small, or we don't have a maintenance team. We don't have these things because they don't exist in the space, or they're not capable of doing that kind of thing. So you have to really shorten it down and figure out what the meat of the issue is in OT.
And what would be your core area in such a questionnaire if someone was to come up with one?
For OT, I mean, looking at IEC 62443 is a great way to start and say, are you following this kind of stuff? Look at the Purdue model and see, how are they building things up in that way? Because if they're not, then they're not going to be taking that seriously. The main question is your OT and your IT connected. If the answer is no, good stuff. The answer is yes. Hey, why is that?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I know we are almost at the end of the time. Appreciate you guys listening in. Thank you,
Yeah.
panelists. If anybody has any follow-up questions, we'll be right outside. And I know
And
they
feel
want
free to
have.
connect on LinkedIn. We'd love to chat. Thank you.
Thank you.